I focus on tech ethics, running the nonprofit based in New York with a global audience called All Tech is Human. The name right there should tell a little bit about my predisposition and what we're discussing today. And what we're discussing really is the motivation, right? The environment and the mindset that is needed to co-create a tech future that is aligned with our values. Here's why it's important, because technology is intertwined with the future of democracy. It's intertwined with the human condition. It affects how we live, love, learn, even how we die. That's a big deal. That's why I'm taking this dramatic pause. Take that in, because technology is altering how we see the world, and that is a big deal. What I focus on, and the reason why I got on this plane to come to this incredible venue, so I can't let you down with this background because this is incredible. Love this stage. But the reason why I came here and have a little bit of jet lag, one, because communal gatherings are important in the 21st century. Even though we can convey information online, it's still crucial to shake somebody's hand, to be in a room together, to understand our values, our tensions, our trade-offs, our best practices, why you're different than I am, based on our historical backgrounds, based on our upbringing, based on our age, our viewpoints, our ethnicity, right? That influences how we see the world, and how we see the world has to be connected with the tech future that we create. However, this conversation is not all just flowers and butterflies. I come with some bad news, but as an American, I have to also end with some good news. So I have some good news and some bad news. Let's start with the bad news. The bad news, and what I'm getting with the slides coming up, is that I am worried that we could have a future that is anti-human. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is a future where we're lonely, where we're disconnected, and where we feel alienated. It seems kind of paradoxical that the rise of social media has also intersected with the rise of a loneliness epidemic. When they did a recent study, they found that loneliness has the impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Also, by a recent American study in 1990, only 3% of Americans, when they were polled, said they had 0 friends. So 3% of people had no friends in 1990. By the year 2021, that went up to 12%. So that quadrupled, coinciding with the rise of social media. What I focus on in my work, trying to bring together a broad group of people across civil society, government, industry, and academia, is this idea that that's not a tech future we want. Technology is designed, and its very idea is to make our lives better, to have more friends, to have more fun. So if you're having less fun and less friends in the future, that's not a future we want. Just walking by in the lobby here, I saw a brain bar sign that said faith in the future. I love that phrase. I would just add a little asterisk to that to say, I have faith in the future because I have faith in us. I have faith in humans coming together to create that collective vision, and then tying that vision with key levers of power. In my own work, we focus on taking this knowledge, taking this global community with all different backgrounds, different age groups. We've got college students, we've got high school students, we've got artists, designers, artists, advocates, venture capitalists, the ethicist. This is where we need the saints and the poets. We need everybody on board, because technology should not be left solely to technologists. Because technology is altering our world, our worldview. Again, that is a big deal. Let's start with a question. We can do some polls, get up, have a little hand exercise. Right now, 2 different tech futures we tend to imagine. So raise your hand, because I even saw this poll outside, right? Talked about, well, how do you see our tech future? Where's it going? Raise your hand if you feel like we're headed towards a dystopian tech future. Raise your hand right now. We're going dystopia. All right, we got a lot of Black Mirror fans in here, a lot of dark people. They're worried. What's so high? Start with the bad news. But again, good news is we have incredible people across the globe who can come together, who can affect that change. Raise your hand if you are utopian. I'm trying to find photos that, are more utopian. So raise your hand if you're utopian. Incredible, okay, so about 50-50. Hate to say this, but I just set you all up because neither is really where we're headed, because our tech future is undecided. We tend to view the world, we tend to view our future through a binary, through it's either going to be incredible, like the Jetsons, we're gonna have flying cars, we're only gonna have to work 4 hours a week, right? Well, that obviously hasn't happened. So sometimes we might think our life is gonna be like Minority Report. We're gonna have predictive technologies. We're gonna have these Orwellian fears. It's gonna be a surveillance economy. And then we're saying, my God, that's not life. That's not the life I want to live. But in reality, in the work I focus on, dealing with governmental actors, dealing with major tech and social media platforms, dealing with hundreds of civil society, nonprofit organizations that are doing valuable research, valuable awareness building. Our tech future is constantly being written. The problem, however, is that a small sliver of society, oftentimes coalescing around Silicon Valley, part of California. So you have one part of one state, of one country, impacting people in Hungary. That's a big deal. And is that appropriate? I would argue no. Because if you're impacted by technology, you should also be able to impact its design and development and deployment. That's why I like to say no application without representation, not about us without us. I'm gonna get into why this happens, but just as a key part of how far off we are is when we traditionally think about our tech future, we tend to have this bias, this assumption of perpetual digitalization. I can't tell you how many of these incredible conferences I've been at, similar to Brain Bar, where you have somebody on stage, not me, somebody else, will say, well, in the future, for example, a couple years ago, we're all gonna be in the metaverse. We're all gonna use blockchain. We're all gonna use Bitcoin. Or before that, we're gonna use Google Glass, and a couple years later, we're gonna use Snap Spectacles. I see nobody wearing augmented technology. I see people who rode on public transportation, right? A technology that is quite old. So the future is not predetermined. The future is whatever the heck we want it to be. We're the ones who determine what we buy or don't buy. We're the ones who say, metaverse sounds kind of lonely. I want more friendships. I want more connection. If we have a crisis of connection, do you think people are going to gravitate towards something that seems lonely? Of course not. The idea is that digitalization is not on this path, is not on this march. That is just a helpful tool that somebody who is trying to sell something is going to tell you, because that alleviates their own responsibility. For example, if I'm trying to sell you a piece of technology, it's a lot better for me to tell you, well, it's just technology, that's just where we're headed, as opposed to, I am trying to sell you something, I want you to buy it, so my stock goes up, right? That's the dirty truth. As a point, every year since the release of the iPhone in 2007 has coincided, interestingly enough, with the rise of vinyl record sales. Taylor Swift selling a lot of vinyl records. Quite interesting, counterintuitive, because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would have said, there's no need for books. You can have a library on this flash drive. So why do we have books? I don't know, maybe because we like to sit on a beach and smell something and read something. Maybe because we're already staring at computer screens and we want to be away from that. right? Maybe because we want to show somebody else that we're smart and we're reading this book and they can see the cover. We have human needs. We are not machines. If you cut me open on stage, which please do not, I will not drip zeros and ones. I'll bleed red blood, right? That is important to remember because we are irrational beings. We have our desires, and we're all different. That is what's influencing our tech future, and our tech future is influencing how we see the world. We have to be part of that, and that's what we talk about, this idea that we recognize that we need to collectively work towards this. What I'm going to get into with what I mentioned with the mindset, the environment, and the motivation is this idea that it is a collective movement. Technology is not happening to us, it's happening by us. But right now, the by us is a very small percentage of people and does not include many people here. And that is not right, and that is a problem. But of course, as I said, I've got good news. The good news is that there is a global responsible tech movement that is inserting people. And that's what the organization I run, All Tech is Human, is even focused on, trying to bring people, bridge that gap. That's why I even have the picture. Hey, there's a bunch of people. They come together. Sometimes I wonder, and people ask, so why are these gatherings? Why are so many people showing up? Because we can't even keep up with the amount of in-person gatherings we're doing, right? And I've analyzed it, and what it comes down to is people are reacting to something. People are reacting to a feeling of isolation, a feeling of saying, it's not just about my individual solitary pursuit. I'm part of something larger. Aren't we all in society? Don't we have families and friends? So we're an individual, but we also interact with that kind of larger space of society. And as humans, we have an individual desire to be part of something larger. That something larger is this collective movement. I always like this definition. Agency is the power people have to think for themselves and act in ways that shape their experiences and life trajectories. Where I think people are reacting to is that they feel a sense of lacking agency, that they are not influencing their future, that it's being told to them, hey, whether you like it or not, you're going to the metaverse. But what if you're saying, well, I don't want to do that? What if you don't want to use a certain platform? My argument is this comes down to our agency. You don't want something? Don't do it. If enough people don't do it, it doesn't happen. Life is not magic, although I did walk past the Houdini place. Life is not magic. Life happens because people come together. Some great books, and even ones that influenced me. These three great ones. Douglas Rushkoff done some amazing work over the last 2 decades with Team Human. Also, You Are Not a Gadget. That's where Jaron Lanier, actually, who started out as a virtual reality pioneer in the 1990s. Virtual reality, yes, has been around that long. Look it up, or watch Lawnmower Man by Stephen King. What I like about that is this idea of creative lock-in. We oftentimes view the world as it is and think that the only possibility is a derivative of the past, as opposed to questioning the underlying past. In other words, if we don't like the way that social media is designed, then we can design different social media platforms. Obviously easier said than done, but we can push towards pro-social design. It's our future. It's our time, right? That's what we're getting at. Also, like Dr. Joy, her book focusing on unmasking AI. She also has a movie on Netflix called Coded Bias. She's a great example of taking in that human agency, of saying there's too much bias in algorithms. Algorithms are affecting our life trajectory. Therefore, garbage in, garbage out. We need to get different types of people in the tech industry. We need to make less bias in our algorithms. So these 3 key ingredients, as I talked about and set up before, mindset, environment, motivation, let's get right into them. What's important to underline, though, because this trips up a lot of people. Especially my own background as an American, oftentimes we're raised to be these individuals. And even if you look at society, like go back to the baby boomers in the 1960s, there was this hyper-individualism of you alone can do it. And I really think that globally, we're reacting to this to say, you know what? One, that's kind of selfish, but two, that only gets you so far. Yes, I'm an individual. I care about myself as a person, but guess what? I also care about society at large. I'm not, a narcissist, right? And most people aren't. They want the good for society. This requires both the individual, internal motivation, also the collective action that needs to happen. If we get into these three parts, even if we're looking at a light sign, three options tend to be, you think that the future's already decided. These are people who tend to be like a cyber libertarian ethos, as they would call it, somebody who thinks, it doesn't matter whether we like this technology or not, we're just headed towards this future. You have the second option, which would be smaller, but sometimes people talk to me about transhumanists. You've got Neuralink, Elon Musk's company, with the brain-computer interface, right? Kind of fascinating technology. Obviously brings up a lot of interesting tech ethical concerns. Not in that camp either. I think most people fall under that third camp, that the future happens by us, by our volition, by our desires. And if we are not part of that process, and this is important, I think, for the brain bar ethos, we feel like we are passive, like we're watching the future happen, as opposed to being an active participant to steer our own destiny. You want to talk about what it is to be human? It's agency. It's free will. If I don't feel like I have free will, then I feel less than human. And honestly, I think in 2024 and moving ahead, a lot of people, when I talk to them, they don't say it necessarily in that way, but they feel less than human. And I think we're trying to get back to that equilibrium, as we tend to do. And that's why I picked that really sad photo, right, where she's feeling outside the system. We should not be outside the system. People always think they don't belong. They feel like they're not a technologist. They don't have this background. They didn't go to a Stanford University or a certain university that people know, and it's a pipeline to the tech industry. But what I'm getting at is it's not about technology. Society is technology. The future is technology. Our humanity is intertwined with technology. Therefore, each one of us has a role, each one of us has a responsibility and a motivation to get involved with this. What's also important, what we focus on with All Tech is Human, is this environment. You need to have this welcoming environment that demystifies technology, where everybody feels like they can affect this change. It promotes knowledge sharing, collaboration. It's agnostic. Strange bedfellows can come together and affect those levers of change. That's why I bring up the mindset again, because you have the individual and the collective. The individual, collective, they mesh together. Got the famed Hungarian invention, Rubik's Cube. Loved using that analogy because that deals with the interconnectedness of life. One side, one group, right? Regulators, the government does one thing and that affects the tech industry, or the tech industry changes something on their product and that affects the individual. Or a journalist writes an article which affects the public, which then affects the politician. It's just like a Rubik's Cube. Each side affects the other totality of the color. So it's also hard, but it's also doable if you've watched the YouTube videos. Just when we focus on the actual action, we try to focus on action. So if you're looking for ways, definitely behoove and want each one of you to take part in this, right? My organization, All Tech is Human, focuses on this, but there's hundreds of organizations across the globe to focus on their participation. For example, we've got about 100 countries, over 10,000 people on our Slack. These are people, all different languages, all different backgrounds, who are saying, these are my values, these are my concerns. And this is where we are going to end it, right on time, getting ready for the hot seat. But thank you all for listening. Let's co-create a better tech future. And now let's get into some Q&A. Thank you. Thank you.
It's time to take the hot seat, David. There you go, right there. Good. All right, we are open now for questions. I see we have one here.
I would like to say, since you mentioned about like how we should have agency and how we should all be coming together, but is it really possible? We look at how the interconnected nature of like technology sector today and like capital as well, because we've tried with Mastodon, we've tried with some other tools of like social networks, and some of them had amazing ideas, but didn't really take off. I mean, even a lot of internet in the culture, people said we have Reddit left, right? And even that has been more recently taken over by venture capitalists, and we have all sorts of changes to the system and whatnot. And so I think if we imagine a future in technology where we have like agency and like it's user-driven and it's really trying to bring the best in human connection and collaboration and so forth, then is that something really realistic considering the nature of like, capitalism as well? Because you look at all the big companies and big tech. Silicon Valley is literally a trillion billion dollar industry, right? You can't have a bunch of, as much as I share your passion with this, but I think it's very difficult to have that in practice. How do you envision this future?
Of course. Well, I mean, even when we think about social media platforms, tell the consolidation of power, because to your point, everything does sometimes in these arguments come back to the structure, to capitalism. Even when we look at a platform like Facebook, now called Meta, there had always been arguments that the very underlying business structure had been set up in a way that goes against kind of our own pro-social needs. But what I will say is Silicon Valley is also littered with companies that used to seem immovable. For example, before Facebook, you had MySpace. Whatever happened to MySpace, right? There was talk at the time of whether they would connect. I think this is also why I mentioned the creative lock-in. So I definitely hear what you're saying, because I'm not Pollyannish. I'm dealing a lot of times with different consulates and embassies, people who are thinking about how these changing laws impact it as well. And I would say that's the key part. So there's the famous infomercial in the United States where they used to say, set it and forget it. And I think that is the wrong philosophy. And I think if we base it on that, to your point, capitalism is setting up a perverse incentive structure that goes against our own human needs. This is where lawsuits and changing regulation comes into play. The reason why I mentioned the Rubik's Cube is to your point. If we just go to Meta, if we just go to TikTok, if we just go to Snap, and we say, hey, this isn't what we want, there's a famous phrase, why do you rob a bank? Because that's where the money is. Why do people exploit our data online? Because that's where the money is. That's what venture capitalists have incentivized. So until you change that structure, then going after on one side of the equation is never going to be enough. So to your point, the business model really deeply impacts it. So this is where, with All Tech is Human, what we've focused on, which is complicated, is saying we need to change the laws. We need to change the industry by having different types of people who care about these issues involved. So you have change from the inside, from the outside, and then reimagining. And then you also need to have proactive journalists who are making people aware on this. So I'm definitely not Pollyannish. I don't think it's an easy part, and it's a natural, it's going to be a long kind of evolution and fight with this. But I do think, to your example with Mastodon and what happened, with Twitter when they went to X, a lot of people could also flip that around and say, well, Mastodon was extremely difficult to use. So a grandmother is probably not going to go on Mastodon, where it's kind of set up in a decentralized manner. So I think that also showed that there was a desire to do something different. So I think it could be a precursor of where we're headed. But I think we always need to look at these interlocking parts and not a silver bullet solution. It's not going to be easy, but change the laws, change the education, change the human agency, and that's where I think you're going to see the systematic change.
My question is, you have outlined the importance of this systematic change, and you also touched the topic of social media. And in my experience, many people have the fear of missing out. What if? Yeah. I don't know how credible you can be when you say to them that future happens by us, or this change can happen by us, when they try to do it, and even then they have have the lacking of community, and they just cannot get the right solution to their problems, because either way they will be stuck in a very hard position.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One, people have sometimes flipped around the fear of missing out with saying JOMO, what's the joy of missing out? So I think sometimes you can flip that dynamic, right? But also, to your larger point, I think what people struggle with, to deal with these hard problems, you also need to have this support network. So one of my slides there focused on this need for inspiration. And a lot of times, people kind of question me about it to say, well, what does that have to do? Isn't it just information? Isn't it just about change? And one of the things that we realized is that, to your point, it's one step ahead, one step back, and then two steps ahead, one step back. So what is needed is this ecosystem that's cohesive to actually say, okay, we didn't win here. It doesn't seem like we're making this impact, but when we look at the totality, we're moving ahead. So I think as humans, we always struggle with this fact of saying, if I put in a lot of energy and I didn't see impact, I am going to feel like it's not worth it and I might give up. This is why I argue it's not a solitary pursuit. Because if we just view that, we're saying, well, one person can't just change the world. I don't think we need more thought leaders. What I think we need is more community leaders, and more spaces where you are then supported by other people who might say, hey, I liked your idea. Maybe it didn't work here. How can we build upon that? And that's a lot of what we're trying to do to promote this knowledge sharing and collaboration, because we do feel defeated. This is hard. But this is also something that is worthwhile. And the motivation part that I was getting into is that there's an attraction sometimes of saying, this is really important work. And it's never going to be easy, but nothing worth fighting for is going to be easy. So how do we create that support network to actually plan for the long haul? So I think that's the key part, is the support, the inspiration, because we're always defeated. I feel defeated every week, but I also have a lot of wins every week, right? And I think that's key. I need people to bounce off and say, hey, that didn't work out. What can we do differently? So I think that was a great question, so thank you for asking.
Big round of applause for David Ryan Polgar, everybody.
Thank you.